Good afternoon. What I want to do is to actually talk about Dennis, but really look at, what are the experiences that Dennis has gone through, which makes him what he is, and what's he like as a human being. That's really what I want to talk to him about. There are enough books written about HR, which I'm going to suggest that that's not the area that I'm going to spend time talking to him about. But I want to know that when you were sort of making the decision to be in HR, were you one of those guys who sort of knew that, okay, I want to do HR, and then you straight away landed up there, or did you kind of, meander on the way? How did it happen?
That's a really good question. Like, how does anyone ever join HR, right? Mine came from when I was a small kid, growing up in a family that was a manufacturer. My father was a machinist. He made tool and die. And he was always on strike every 3 years. As a young kid, you didn't understand why Dad was home every 3 years. And as I got older, it was like, well, that's obvious because they had a contract dispute. I used to think, like, why do labor and management, why can't they get together? And that's what actually drew me to HR. So actually, my master's is in industrial relations. I trained to be kind of an industrial relations person to save the world from the conflict that management and labor would typically have. And that's what took me to HR. I've had many opportunities to go into other functions. When I was at Procter, they wanted me to go into advertising, become an ad manager. But I really liked HR.
So a lot of HR people, believe that the function is pretty much industry agnostic, which means I could be doing HR in a manufacturing company today and then be in services industry. Is that a valid assumption? Is that how you look at it, and do you think it's going to change in future?
That's a great question. You weren't supposed to ask that question.
Yeah, I thought we said... They told me don't ask this question.
That's a really good question. If you had asked me that 10 years ago, I would have given you a completely different answer, but I've worked in consumer products industry twice, media entertainment twice, high tech twice, and I'd say HR is common across those industry sectors. How it's applied is different. If I think about NXP Semiconductor, my last role, their primary customers are Samsung and Apple, and they're very tough customers, which drives much faster speed to market, and so your HR systems have to be a lot simpler, whereas P&G and Kellogg's product cycle is 12, 18 months typically in the old days, and so you had a little bit different angle in on your HR system, but I would say it's agnostic. It really is. I mean, a good HR person is a good HR person whether they're in making cereal or making semiconductors, has been my view.
But from the way you describe it, it seems that when you are in a business which is moving rapidly, you kind of tend to do HR or any of the people practices in broad strokes.
Yes.
Whereas when you have a longer time cycle of the product, 12 to 18 months, such as happens in P&G or some of the other companies there, then there is a greater likelihood that you will get into more granularity as the processes are more well-defined and you have more developmental focus. So if you're advising somebody who's in B school who wants to take up HR as a profession, would you then say that, start off in a consumer goods kind of an environment, get the details, and then maybe move to something else?
I don't think so. My recommendation, I spend a lot of time with young people on campus, is just be good at what you're choosing to put your energy against. And that's whether you're an HR person, marketing person, it's choosing well because you're going to spend a long time at it. Your typical work days, 12, 14, 16-hour days. I've worked those for the last 30 years. But work never felt like work. It always felt like pleasure. 16 hours.
So if you had any dreams that you're going to go to some other country and have a better life, then forget it.
Not in my shop.
That's not how it works. Yeah. This is evidence that it's just as bad everywhere.
Well, I think, again, I was being facetious to 16 hours, but I think the point I was trying to make is that whatever you choose to do in life, choose well so that it becomes an avocation as opposed to an occupation. So it's something you love to do. So your first moment when you put your head on the pillow at night, you're thinking about the company. When you wake up in the morning, you're in the shower, you're thinking about the company. It's that sort of environment where you just can't wait to get to work. I mean, that's what I meant by, choosing well. But it doesn't matter where you start, whether it's consumer products or semiconductors. It's understanding as a young person, and there's a lot of young people in the room, what the value chain is in an organization. How does a company make money? how do I follow the flow of activities? Because work is lateral, it's not hierarchical. And so if I can think through and I can design my career around following how work gets done at an organization and understand the connection points between market. Why is marketing so important to sales? Why is inventory so important to the profit and loss, working capital? Why does manufacturing inventory really affect your bottom line? If you can stitch all that together and design your career along that axis, you're a much better HR professional.
So really getting a view of business and sort of following that sequence through.
Yes.
Yeah. So most of the times when you ask people, why do you want to do HR? This is one of the things that, and one of the most hackneyed responses is that because I'm
like
very
people.
good with people.
Yeah, I know.
I
the biggest
love
question.
talking to people. Nobody says, do people love talking to you?
Right.
So,
Right.
So how does one figure out whether it's a good idea to be in HR or not? What's the self-awareness question one should be asking? What is the experience one should be tapping into to decide that?
Well, I have to say that my least favorite response when I'm interviewing people is why in HR, and they say because I like people. I draw a line through their name. I draw a line, mentally I'm going, this person's not going to make it.
Completely.
Now, HR is all about humans, right? But I think what it's about is unleashing the capacity of people. So you have to believe fundamentally that, people are noble, they're worthy. You have to have an interest in people, but you don't necessarily have to like them. I think people end up being drawn into HR. I'm trying not to be too negative, but sometimes they're there, but they really don't understand the impact of their work on the business. So I guess what I'd say is, from an HR perspective, the best people stand out is that you can't tell whether they're HR people or whether they're business people. I mean, the greatest praise I've ever had is, God, you sure you're an HR person? Because you sound like a business person. And I think that's what, as you design your career, the lexicon of the business has to be in your vocabulary. It's not HR speak, HR transformation and HR this and HR that. It's background noise. It's, can you follow the money, revenue, profit, margin performance? Can you know the business, not as well as the CFO, but reasonably well enough that you can hold a conversation in the boardroom or on the leadership team? I think that's where you get your joy, and that creates impact. When you understand the business and you understand it really well, then you can bring expertise to it that nobody else on a leadership team has, which is how humans work, how organizations work, how you motivate people, how you design systems to create productivity and commitment to an organization.
So, this question always comes to my mind that, is it true that when people sort of put on that kind of a perspective, that lens of understanding business and sort of working with it, there comes a time when you stop worrying about the people element of it, because then you kind of speak the same language as the business person. So you say, yeah, we need to shut this place down and all of that. And so does it mean that when you sort of move to one side of the equation, you are giving up the other side? And if not, how would one balance it out? What's your take on it?
Well, it certainly doesn't mean that if you're close to the business, you lose sight of the importance of having an independent viewpoint on the organization. I mean, I've seen people flip where they collude with the business. Whatever the business objective is, I salute and go. My role, at least as I performed it at the CHR level, is understand the business, understand the imperative, the leverage points that a business has, but also then be the voice in the room in terms of, I know what we're trying to do, but here's how we ought to be doing it to reflect what company we are, what values we hold, because that'll speak volumes in terms of what we believe in as a company. So you don't give up on that. You don't obscure that. So there's a balance act. But you first and foremost have to be really good on the business. And I got to tell you, again, I've been at this for 30 some odd years. It's unbelievable. It goes so fast.
Seriously.
But usually is a third of the HR people that I've worked with really understand the business. They get it. They understand it. They breathe it. They've been great perspective. There's another third. Sometimes I wonder, where did you come from? Because they have no relevance to the business. They're kind of unto themselves. And then there's a middle bit that want to be led. And if you can connect them to the business, help them understand the business, and have them grow in their confidence, then I think great things happen. It's a great profession. I I frankly wouldn't do it all. I would do nothing over, actually. I have loved, not loved every minute, but just about every minute of HR.
Yeah.
It's been fun. It's been a blast.
So if you had to start your life again, you would again do HR?
I would do it again.
Man, you're a glutton for punishment.
Without question. Yeah, no.
But
so my wife says.
No. I'm going to put the other tricky question is, why is it then, so obviously there are a lot of HR people who are very passionate about HR. Yeah. Why do people hate HR so much? I mean, like,
because we make
catbird and
we make it easy to be hated.
Why?
Because we are so trapped sometimes in our own stuff.
So,
for example,
like finance as well. Finance is also laying boundaries. You can't spend that, you can't do that. But why is it that, finance guys don't get hated as much as the HR guys? Everybody say, he's a finance guy. I know he's going to do that. But with HR guys, we have a point of view. I mean, I hate that guy.
Because I think finance generationally has created a level of capability and insight and acumen on the business that's unreproachable. People, your CFO, like, they understand the business. HR people have a hard time grasping, in my judgment, where I've worked, the basics of the business. And so what happens is that HR people then specialize too much. They create all these systems that the line organization is to interact with that may feel good from an HR standpoint. Like, hey, I designed this new recruiting system, I designed this new performance management system, and I feel good about that. The line organization doesn't want it, doesn't need it, doesn't understand it. And then people get frustrated by that. My view is that, again, getting close to the business, understanding it, really appreciating life in the hot chair, I call it, the CEO role, what they have to contend with, is really where you add your value. Finance, I think, has been very successful in its time of carving out what the role is. I think HR could carve out a wonderful role, which is all about strategy. How do you bring purpose and meaning to your organization? How do you deploy it in a way that allows people to understand what's required but also motivates them? Understanding what capabilities need to be built. And then how do you simplify work such that you can unleash that rare commodity you have, which is people?
But, therein lies the contradiction, because, and not necessarily a contradiction from your side, but here is what I find difficult to grapple with. So now I'm going to just draw a parallel between the finance systems and HR systems and sort of say, look, when finance guys say, this is a different ratio, so you're flouting, this is ruining this ratio and that ratio, you got to say, okay, I get it, so I should not be doing that. So we understand. When the HR guy says, here is how you are getting appraisal wrong, we say, that's a stupid bureaucratic system. Isn't that unfair? I mean, one group has its set of norms. Both are gatekeepers. Yeah. Finance guy has a gatekeeper for the money part of it. On the people issue and the business issue, there is a, HR part of it. Yeah. Why then would you hate one and not the other?
Well, I think it depends, to be honest, it depends what company you're working in. I've had the great fortune of working in companies. The people I've worked for said, listen, the two people I want by my side is the CFO and the CHRO, always.
So this is let's take a case like a Disney or a P&G.
Yeah.
Both are great companies. I have a lot of respect for them. Were the HR people hated there as well?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
So maybe that's the trick.
But I can tell you there's certain things in those companies that even I would say, what in the hell are we doing? I'll give you an example. Just as a small example. I was running the UK back in the 90s, and we had a guy that was retiring. He had 58 years with the company. We were going to. He's a farmer. We were going to buy him a windmill. Okay, It wasn't in the policy book. So I sent a note to the corporate group and I said, listen, this guy's got 58 years of the company. We're going to buy a windmill. Please secure approval. I get back a note that says you would be setting a dangerous precedent if you do that. It's like, how many people are going to retire after 58 years, for Christ's sakes? 58 years. He started 16 years old.
No, I mean, so there was a point of time where it was possible. But
yeah, so I shredded the note, we just went ahead and did it. But those small things sometimes will, but I think generally speaking, your point is, I have an experience where HR has been hated. I can understand it, but I haven't experienced it. In fact, most line people I've worked with said, how do I get more of what you do, because it's value. When I worked at P&G, The line executive I worked for was the second most powerful woman in the company ever, first most powerful company person. And we would fly, either we'd sequence our travel, so I'd fly in ahead of her, or I'd go behind her, because we were always looking at the business from the metrics as well as the human element together, whether it was together or ahead of her or behind her. And that was a partnership, and that's what's really important. The word I'd say that most people miss in HR is, how do you effectively partner with your line capability? And you got to get inside their world. You got to understand the pressures that a CEO's under. And until you demonstrate that you understand that, people will look at you as not adding as much value as you could.
So somewhere then, in order to have credibility, something which has credibility is, when you think of any profession, so you sort of respect a professional who has a method of doing this, and it provides a repeatable result.
Yes.
A surgeon, knows there is one way to do surgery, and there is, this is how it works. So we respect that. Do you think then HR needs to actually get more complicated so that the other person has no way of figuring it out, and
well, that would be professional preservation, perhaps, but I wouldn't recommend that.
No, then, because if it is too simple, now look at it like this. The HR guy in the interview asked the question, why do you want to join the company? And he says, because I love this, I've always dreamt of joining this. It doesn't take much years of experience to ask those questions, right? HR guy knows it, the business guy knows it. So then why do you need the HR guy?
Yeah.
Where can the HR person value add?
We're getting into a career discussion, but let me kind of take it a little bit further. I think what happens is that HR people over-specialize themselves. That's what happens. So when I look at an HR person, I'm going, okay, can you do recruiting, or can you do recruiting and talent? Can you do talent, recruiting, and performance management? So you try to grow people so that they can do all of the HR functional capability in my world where I grew up, as opposed to deep specialization. Because when people have specialized themselves, they tend to really create complexity. And that is what gets in the way of the line organization appreciation HR. They will, HR people say, but I created this great product. It's like, but I don't know how to use it, I don't need it, I don't want it. So it's getting that intersection correct between what the line organization needs and wants, and sometimes, by the way, they don't know they need it, and careers that are worked laterally so that people understand the whole process of HR. That's what I think gets in the way of people being influential.
A lot of the sectors which are classically driven entirely by talent. I mean, it's like one person's role can make or break the entire organization. Yeah. So what comes to my mind is, let's say movies. Yeah, where whether you have Richard Gere doing this or somebody else doing this could make a tremendous difference. In that scenario, none of these sectors, none of these industries have any HR people. If you have really talented people, is it fair to say that you don't need HR?
Well, I would say working in media and entertainment, you have HR people. They just don't call themselves HR.
What do they call themselves?
They're talent scouts. They're talent management. They're talent gurus. They're people that sit between the movie houses, for example, and the production houses and the directors and the actors and actresses. So they are in a way serving the capacity of an HR person, but they're just not titled that way.
What is, in your view, if you had to pick only one aspect of HR work which you think really adds value more than everything else? It's a 80-20 function, so it could be compensation, it could be hiring, it could be development, it could be whatever. Mm-hmm. Which one aspect of HR do you think adds 80% of value to business and rest everything is like?
It would be strategy. So I come from a world of recruiting, compensation, benefits management, talent management, performance management. Those are capabilities that are discharged pretty well by the HR function, whether it's outsourced or whether it's insourced. The differentiator for great HR people is to be able to sit at the side of a business leader and say, okay, how are we going to grow the business over the next 3 to 5 years? How do we develop key focus areas for strategy? And then how do we get it in the organization in a way that creates clarity and creates purpose and meaning? That's where HR people should live. Now, the previous interview, I was listening to her talk about Dave Ulrich, and you know, Dave, I don't know if you are familiar with Dave. Dave spent his life trying to push people into the business part of HR. So I think that's the differentiator. If I could take a young person and say, listen, the first assignment I want you to have is not in HR. I want you in the business. I've sent people into manufacturing for 3 years. Myself, I packed soap for a couple of years. I learned what it was like to make Downy and Ariel, and we learned all about the innards.
So how did that help you become a better HR person? So you learned to pack soap. How does that teach you how to do compensation better or development better or strategy better?
I think a couple different ways. I understood the methodology of how a plant runs. I understand the team dynamics because it was all team-based. I'd understand the rhythm and pace that a business has to have. Like if you are not making the right production run, there's a problem. Where if you're in corporate, you never get that sense of pace, heat. So it taught me a lot. In fact, I draw on that assignment probably more than any in my life. And that happened 30 years ago. But I remember it like it was yesterday because it taught me the value of hard work, teamwork, and then pace of the business that you needed to deliver stuff. And there weren't many excuses along the way that were accepted.
So I would push back and say that you could learn about hard work, teamwork, without doing a stint in business. If you simply continued being in HR, you would learn about hard work, some work where the manager makes you slog. You would learn about teamwork because, you coordinate a very complex project. Why should I have to go in business?
You can choose that path, but in my book, by virtue of the experiences I've had, the better HR people, the ones that have had, you can see it. They naturally understand. They have an affinity for the business. They understand the levers. They understand the imperatives. They're not blinded by it. They're not blinkered by it. And they find a way then to bring their professional craft of HR more directly into the business in a much more easy to use way. So it teaches pragmatism at the end of the day. Again, I remember as a young guy, I remember designing a performance management or performance appraisal process. It was a big 3-ring binder. It was the greatest thing. It was 70 pages. I was real proud of it. And I remember taking it to the plant manager, and he just kind of binned it. He put it in the bin. He just threw it. He says, I don't know what you've been working on. This has no value at all. Wow. But it was his way and his harsh way of teaching me about, listen, before you start something, make sure you know what you're trying to do with it. And that was understanding the business.
What I take from your point of view is that, getting a cross-functional perspective makes you a richer HR person. Is that a correct conclusion?
I think so. This is my experience. Now again, I've had great functional experts that have worked with me, comp and benefits in the U.S. in particular, given a lot of the legislation that's been passed post-bank crisis. You really need to have deep specialty in comp, in particular executive compensation. Can be done pretty well, but the people that stand out are the ones that can see how it fits together, and then they can bring a sense of realism and pragmatism to the world, the boardroom. And one of the reputations I had was the great simplifier. God, you make things so complex, so simple. And I said, at the end of the day, it's people want to be treated respectfully. People want to understand how their work contributes and fits with the broader whole. And people want to have confidence in leadership that they've charted the right path. Pretty fundamental and pretty simple. So I think a little bit of the work of HR is to demystify what we do and break it down into bite-sized chunks, because we are creating complexity that line organizations can't handle. It makes us susceptible to cost reduction efforts, because I think in a lot of companies, when you don't understand it, you don't like it as a result, and therefore your compulsion is to trim it out, is to cost cut it out.
So, one of the most painful aspects of an HR role is to sometimes asking a person to go. And, so have you ever had to do that? And is it tough?
It's
how
tough.
do you deal with that? Because there's a human element. I mean, so how do you deal with that? Because
when it becomes easy, you've lost your way as an HR person. So I say I've been involved in a lot of those at senior levels to junior level. I think empathy for the person and transporting yourself into their shoes for a moment, and then treating them, I just had this, I won't mention the person's name, but he's now a partner at one of the big private equity, and I looked him up on Facebook, and I remember firing him back 30 years ago. We met in London, and I thought they were going to throw us out of the restaurant because we were just laughing. 3 decades later, he says, yeah, you fired me, but you did it in such a humane way that I deserved to be fired, but you did it so well that I've always thought about that, and I always thought it would be kind of fun to work with you again. So it's really, for me, it's whether you are hiring people or whether you're letting them get on with the next business opportunity, you want them to be ambassadors of your company.
Does it mean that when you are doing it for one person, it's easy to sort of be empathetic about it, but what happens when, say someone like Jack Welch who shuts down an entire plant and sort of, you get the reputation of being Neutron Jack and all of that. So how does one deal with that? Have you ever had to do that?
Yeah, of course. I've been.
So when you shut that down, what do they call you? Neutron Dennis?
No, they wouldn't call me Neutron Dennis, but sometimes you do things that you don't want to do, that you have to do, but you never lose sight of the human element of it. I think, to be blunt, I'm not a big proponent of Jack Welch. I think his stuff was overplayed. It's unfortunate so many HR people took his vantage point as the doctrine, as the discipline, as the disciple for HR. I think once, as I mentioned before, when it gets too easy to do those things, you have to go back and re-examine why.
Okay.
So that's been my experience. I've been in big plant shutdowns. I've been in big businesses we've divested, but you never lose sight of the human component, that there's real people that are going home to their husbands or wives and telling them they no longer have a job, and you have a right and responsibility as an HR leader to make it as painless as possible and hopefully help them come out the other side feeling good about themselves, feeling about the opportunity they might have, and then feeling good about the company that they're leaving ultimately.
We have 2 more minutes. I'm going to ask you 2 tough questions.
Okay. Wait a minute, you've already asked me tough questions.
No, those are the easy ones.
Wow.
Real
been softening me up, huh?
Yeah, so now it's sort of, okay. So I want to ask you that, as an HR person, what are the common regrets you hear HR people having? Generic.
Common regrets?
Like, you have people when they are dying, they have common regrets. I wish I had spent more time with the family.
I don't know about HR in general, but mine's been, you make choices in your life, and mine was, I grew up poor, really poor. And I remember at the end of the month, there was a loaf of bread and there was a bottle of mayonnaise, and that was it. That's what you ate for a week. So I had this fear of failure. The whole, no safety net, no money. So I worked my rear end off in college. I've worked really hard my whole life. And my regret is that if I knew how life was going to end up, I probably wouldn't have worked as hard as I have. There was always a specter of if not for me, my family doesn't eat. So it kind of came out of my childhood. I think generally speaking, the HR people I talk with is that, again, I'm a little older now, a little wiser. It goes way too fast. If you really love your work in HR, I can't believe I've been doing it for 35 years. I just can't get over it. But it's gone like that. It's been so much fun. I think that's the common regret, actually, people have in my network is, wow, we're all entering into our late 50s, 60s, and wow, where did the time go? Lifetime is one thing, but also work time is God, we had a little bunch of fun, and it's all about ready to come to a close.
So in which case, you mentioned that you've spent 35 years working and that now you're older and wiser. At which stage does one know that one has become wiser? And what is that moment of epiphany?
That's such a great question. I don't know. I think it happens at different levels. It was a slow process over time. Your values as an individual gets challenged along the way in companies because you have to subjugate what you believe in to the greater good of the company. And at some point, I figured out that doesn't have to be true. And when it gets to that point, it's time to go. It's time to move on to do something else. So I think that's where I'm a little wiser at now. As a result, I coach a lot of young people that if it doesn't feel good, then don't do it, because life's too short to be working at something that you don't have passion for, or you don't have an interest in, or you can't believe in at the end of the day. That's what I learned over my 30-some years.
Dennis, thank you very, very much. I mean, it's been awesome.
Fantastic.
I appreciate your candor. It's been so refreshing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.